is just in its infancy.
Sing. Finally, back to studying. Man, I hate it when it crashes.
With its biggest impact yet to come. But before we get into all that, we should start at computing's origins, because although electronic computers are relatively new, the need for computation is not. The earliest recognized device for computing was the abacus, invented in Mesopotamia around 2500 BCE. It's essentially a hand-operated calculator that helps add and subtract many numbers. It also stores the current state of the computation, much like your hard drive does today. The abacus was created because the scale of society had become greater than what a single person could keep and manipulate in their mind. There might be thousands of people in a village, or tens of thousands of cattle. There are many variants of the abacus, so let's look at a really basic version, with each row representing a different power of 10. So each bead on the bottom row represents a single unit. In the next row, they represent 10, the row above, 100, and so on. Let's say we have 3 heads of cattle represented by 3 beads on the bottom row on the right side. If we were to buy 4 more cattle, we would just slide 4 more beads to the right for a total of 7. But if we were to add 5 more after the first 3, we would run out of beads. So we would slide everything back to the left, slide 1 bead on the second row to the right representing 10, and then add the final 2 beads on the bottom row for a total of 12. This is particularly useful with large numbers. So if we were to add 1251, we would just add 1 to the bottom row, 5 to the second row, 2 to the third row, and 1 to the fourth row. We don't have to add in our head, and the abacus stores the total for us. Over the next 4,000 years, humans developed all sorts of clever computing devices like the astrolabe, which enabled ships to calculate their latitude at sea, or the slide rule for assisting with multiplication and division. And there are literally hundreds of types of clocks created that could be used to calculate sunrise tides, positions of celestial bodies, and even just the time. Each one of these devices made something that was previously laborious to calculate much faster, easier, and often more accurate. It lowered the barrier to entry, and at the same time amplified our mental abilities. Take note, this is a theme we're going to touch on a lot in this series. As early computer pioneer Charles Babbage said, at each increase of knowledge, as well as on the contrivance of every new tool, human labor becomes abridged. However, none of these devices were...
What does that mean?
Contrivance.
Contrivance. Okay.
called computers. The earliest documented use of the word computer is from 1613 in a book by Richard Braithwaite. And it wasn't a machine at all, it was a job title. Braithwaite said, "I've read the truest computer of times and the best arithmetician that ever breathed, and he reduced by days into a short number." In those days, computer was a person who did calculations, sometimes with the help of machines, but often not. This job title persisted until the late 1800s, when the meaning of computer started shifting to refer to devices. And notable among these devices was the step reckoner built by German polymath Gottfried Leibniz in 1694. Leibniz said, "It is beneath the dignity of excellent men to waste their time in calculation when any peasant could do the work just as accurately with the aid of a machine." It worked kind of like the odometer in your car, which is really just a machine for adding up the number of miles the car is driven. The device had a series of gears that turned. Each gear had 10 teeth to represent the digits from 0 to 9. Whenever a gear bypassed 9, it rotated back to 0 and advanced the adjacent gear by 1 tooth. Kind of like when hitting 10 on that basic abacus. This worked in reverse when doing subtraction too. With some clever mechanical tricks, the step reckoner was also able to multiply and divide numbers. Multiplications and divisions are really just many additions and subtractions. For example, if we want to divide 17 by 5, we just subtract 5, then 5, then 5 again, and then we can't subtract any more 5s. So we know 5 goes into 17 3 times, with 2 left over. The step reckoner was able to do this in an automated way, and was the first machine that could do all 4 of these operations. And this design was so successful, it was used for the next 3 centuries of calculator design. Unfortunately, even with mechanical calculators, most real-world problems required many steps of computation before an answer was determined. It could take hours or days to generate a single result. Also, these handcrafted machines were expensive and not accessible to most of the population. Before the 20th century, most people experienced computing through pre-computated tables, assembled by those amazing human computers we talked about. So if you needed to know the square root of 8,675,309, instead of spending all day hand cranking your step reckoner, you could look it up in a huge book full of square root tables in a minute or so. Speed and accuracy is particularly important on the battlefield, and so militaries were among the first to apply computing to complex problems. A particularly difficult problem is accurately firing artillery shells, which by the 1800s could travel well over a kilometre, or a bit more than half a mile. Add to this varying wind conditions, temperature, and atmospheric pressure, and even hitting something as large as a ship was difficult. Range tables were created that allowed gunners to look up environmental conditions and the distance they wanted to fire, and the table would tell them the angle to set the cannon. These range tables worked so well, they were used well into World War II. The problem was, if you changed the design of the cannon or of the shell, a whole new table had to be computed, which was massively time-consuming and inevitably led to errors. Charles Babbage acknowledged this problem in 1822 in a paper to the Royal Astronomical Society entitled Note on the Application of Machinery to the Computation of Astronomical and Mathematical Tables. Let's go to the thought bubble. Charles Babbage proposed a new mechanical device called the difference engine, a much more complex machine that could approximate polynomials. Polynomials describe the relationship between several variables, like range and air pressure, or amount of pizza Carrie Ann eats and happiness. Polynomials could also be used to approximate logarithmic and trigonometric functions, which are a real hassle to calculate by hand. Babbage started construction in 1823, and over the next 2 decades tried to fabricate and assemble the 25,000 components, collectively weighing around 15 tons. Unfortunately, the project was ultimately abandoned. But in 1991, historians finished constructing the difference engine based on Babbage's drawings and writings, and it worked. But more importantly, during construction of the difference engine, Babbage imagined an even more complex machine, the analytical engine. Unlike the difference engine, step reckoner, and all other computational devices before it, the analytical engine was a general-purpose computer. It could be used for many things, not just one particular computation. It could be given data and run operations in sequence. It had memory and even a primitive printer. Like the difference engine, it was ahead of its time. It was never fully constructed. However, the idea of an automatic computer, one that could guide itself through a series of operations automatically, was a huge deal and would foreshadow computer programs. English mathematician Ada Lovelace wrote hypothetical programs for the analytical engine, saying, "A new, a vast, and a powerful language is developed for future use for analysis." For her work, Ada is often considered the world's first programmer. The analytical engine would go on to inspire arguably the first generation of computer scientists, who incorporated many of Babbage's ideas in their machines. This is why Babbage is often considered the father of computing. Thanks, thought bubble. So by the end of the 19th century, computing devices were used for special purpose tasks in the sciences and engineering, but rarely seen in business, government, or domestic life. However, the US government faced a serious problem for its 1819 census that demanded the kind of efficiency that only computers could provide. The US Constitution requires that a census be conducted every 10 years for the purposes of distributing federal funds, representation in Congress, and good stuff like that. And by 1880, the US population was booming, mostly due to immigration. That census took 7 years to manually compile. By the time it was completed, it was already out of date. And it was predicted that the 1819 census would take 13 years to compute. That's a little problematic when it's required every decade. The Census Bureau turned to Herman Hollerith, who built a tabulating machine. His machine was electromechanical. It used traditional mechanical systems to keep count, like Leibniz's step reckoner, but coupled them with electrically powered components. Hollerith's machine used punch cards, which were paper cards with grid locations that could be punched out to represent data. For example, there was a series of holes for marital status. If you were married, you would punch out the married spot. Then when the card was inserted into Hollerith's machine, little metal pins would come down over the card. If a spot was punched out, the pin would pass through the hole in the paper and into a little vial of mercury, which completed the circuit. This now completed circuit powered an electric motor, which which turned a gear to add one, in this case, to the married total. Hollerith's machine was roughly 10 times faster than manual
Yeah,
calculations,
of course
and the census was completed in just 2.5 years, saving the census office millions of dollars. Businesses began recognizing the value of computers, saw its potential to boost profits by improving labor and data-intensive tasks, like accounting, insurance appraisals, and inventory management. To meet this demand, Hollerith founded the Tabulating Machine Company, which later merged with other machine makers in 1924 to become the International Business Machines Corporation, or IBM, which you've probably heard of. These electromechanical business machines were a huge success, transforming commerce and government, and by the mid-1900s, the explosion in world population and the rise of globalized trade demanded even faster and more flexible tools for processing data, setting the stage for digital computers, which we'll talk about next week. Crash Course Computer Science is produced in association with PBS Digital Studios. At their channel, you can check out a playlist of shows like PBS Idea Channel, Physics Girl, and It's OK to be Smart. This episode later.
Okay, great.
Our last episode brought us to the start of the 20th century, where early special-purpose computing devices like tabulating machines were a huge boon to governments and business, aiding in sometimes replacing rote manual tasks. But the scale of human systems continued to increase at an unprecedented rate. The first half of the 20th century saw the world's population almost double. World War I mobilized 17 million people, and World War II involved more than 100 million. Global trade and transit networks became interconnected like never before, and the sophistication of our engineering and scientific endeavors reached new heights. We even started to seriously consider visiting other planets, and it was this explosion of complexity, bureaucracy, and ultimately data that drove an increasing need for automation and computation. Soon, those cabinet-sized electromechanical computers grew into room-sized behemoths that were expensive to maintain and prone to errors, and it was these machines that would set the stage for future innovation. One of the largest electromechanical computers built was the Harvard Mark I, completed in 1944 by IBM for the Allies during World War II. It contained 765,000 components, 3 million connections, and 500 miles of wire. To keep its internal mechanics synchronized, it used a 50-foot shaft running right through the machine, driven by a 5-horsepower motor. One of the earliest uses for this technology was running simulations for the Manhattan Project. The brains of these huge electromechanical beasts were relays, electronically controlled mechanical switches. In a relay, there is a control wire that determines whether a circuit is opened or closed. The control wire connects to a coil of wire inside the relay. When current flows through the coil, an electromagnetic field is created, which in turn attracts a metal arm inside the relay, snapping it shut and completing the circuit. You can think of a relay like a water faucet. The control wire is like the faucet handle. Open the faucet and the water flows through the pipe. Close the faucet and the flow of water stops. Relays are doing the same thing, just with electrons instead of water. The controlled circuit can then connect to other circuits or to something like a motor, which might increment a count on a gear, like in Hollerith's tabulating machine we talked about last episode. Unfortunately, the mechanical arm inside of a relay has mass, and therefore can't move instantly between open and closed states. A good relay in the 1940s might be able to flick back and forth 50 times in a second. That might seem pretty fast, but it's not fast enough to be useful at solving large, complex problems. The Harvard Mark I could do 3 additions or subtractions per second. Multiplications took 6 seconds, and divisions took 15. And more complex operations like a trigonometric function take over a minute. In addition to slow switching speed, another limitation was wear and tear. Anything mechanical that moves will wear over time. Some things break entirely, and other things start getting sticky, slow, and just plain unreliable. And as the number of relays increases, the probability of a failure increases too. The Harvard Mark I had roughly 3,500 relays. Even if you assume a relay has an operational life of 10 years, this would mean you would have to replace on average 140 relay every day. That's a big problem when you're in the middle of running some important multi-day calculations, and that's not all engineers had to contend with. These huge dark and war machines also attracted insects. In September 1947, operators on the Harvard Mark II would have dead moth from a malfunctioning relay. Grace Hopper, who we'll talk more about in a later episode, noted, from then on, when anything went wrong with the computer, we say it had bugs in it. And that's where we get the term computer bug. It was clear that a faster, more reliable alternative to electromechanical relays was needed if computing was going to advance further. Unfortunately, that alternative already existed. In 1904, English physicist John Ambrose Fleming developed a new electrical component called a thermionic valve, which housed 2 electrodes inside an airtight glass bowl. This was the first vacuum tube. One of the electrodes could be heated, which would cause it to emit electrons, a process called thermionic emission. The other electrode could then attract these electrons to create the flow of our electric faucet, but only if it was positively charged. If it had a negative or neutral charge, the electrons would no longer be attracted across the vacuum, so no current would flow. Any electronic component that permits the one-way flow of current is called a diode. But what was really needed was a switch to help turn this flow on and off. Luckily, shortly after in 1906, American inventor Lee De Forest added a third control electrode that sits between the 2 electrodes in Fleming's design. By applying a positive charge to the control electrode, it would permit the flow of electrons as before. But if the control electrode was given a negative charge, it would prevent the flow of electrons. So by manipulating the control wire, one could open or close the circuit. It's pretty much the same thing as a relay, but importantly, vacuum tubes have no moving parts. This meant there was less wear, and they could switch thousands of times per second. These triode vacuum tubes would become the basis of radio, long-distance telephone, and many other electronic devices for nearly half a century. I should note here that vacuum tubes weren't perfect. They're kind of fragile and can burn out like light bulbs, but they were a big improvement over mechanical relays. Also, initially, vacuum tubes were expensive. A radio set often used just one, but a computer might require hundreds or thousands of electrical switches. But by the 1940s, their cost and reliability had improved to the point where they became feasible for using computers, at least by people with deep pockets, like governments. This marked the shift from electromechanical computing to electronic computing. Let's go to the thought bubble. The first large-scale use of vacuum tubes for computing was the Colossus Mark I, designed by engineer Tommy Flowers and completed in December of 1943. The Colossus was installed at Bletchley Park in the UK and helped to decrypt Nazi communications. This may sound familiar because 2 years prior, Alan Turing, often called the father of computer science, had created an electromechanical device also at Bletchley Park called the bomb. It was an electromechanical machine designed to break Nazi enigma codes, but the bomb wasn't technically a computer, and we'll get to Alan Turing's contributions later. Anyway, the first version of Colossus contained 1,600 vacuum tubes, and in total, 10 Colossi were built to help with code breaking. Colossus is regarded as the first programmable electronic computer. Programming was done by plugging hundreds of wires into plug boards, sort of like old-school telephone switchboards, in order to set up the computer to perform the right operations. So while programmable, it still had to be configured to perform any specific computation. Enter the Electronic Numerical Integrator and Calculator, or ENIAC, completed a few years later in 1946 at the University of Pennsylvania. Designed by John Muckley and J. Presper Eckert, this was the world's first truly general-purpose programmable electronic computer. ENIAC could perform 5,000 10-digit additions or subtractions per second, many times faster than any machine that came before it. It was operational for 10 years, and it's estimated to have done more arithmetic than the entire human race up to that point. But with that many vacuum tubes, failures were common, and ENIAC was generally only operational for about half a day at a time before breaking down. Thanks, thought bubble. By the 1950s, even vacuum tube-based computing was reaching its limits. The US Air Force's ANFSQ-7 computer, which was completed in 1955, was part of the SAGE air defense computer system, which we'll talk about more in a later episode. To reduce cost and size, as well as to improve reliability and speed, a radical new electronic switch was needed. In 1947, Bell Laboratory scientists John Barden, Walter Britton, and William Shockley invented the transistor, and with it, a whole new era of computing was born. The physics behind transistors is pretty complex, relying on quantum mechanics, so we're going to stick to the basics. A transistor is just like a relay or vacuum tube. It's a switch that can be opened or closed by applying electrical power via a control wire. Typically, transistors have 2 electrodes separated by a material
Yeah,
will sometimes
that's the
conduct
one I use
electricity
for
and
my
other times resist it.
whiteboard.
A semiconductor. In this case, the control wire attaches to a gate electrode. By changing the electrical charge of a gate, the conductivity of the semiconducting
knows?
material can be manipulated, allowing current to
Where's
flow or
my
be stopped,
pointer?
like the water faucet analogy we
Give me
discussed
my
earlier.
pointer.
Even the very first transistor at Bell Labs showed tremendous promise. It could switch between on and off states
Okay.
10,000 times per second. Further, unlike vacuum tubes made of glass and with carefully suspended fragile components, transistors were solid material, known as a solid-state component. Almost immediately, transistors could be made smaller than the smallest possible relays of vacuum tubes. This led to
Hold on, let me watch this.
activity of the semiconducting material can be manipulated, allowing current to flow or be stopped, like the water faucet analogy we discussed earlier. Even the very first transistor at Bell Labs showed tremendous promise. It could switch between on and off states 10,000 times per second.
Oh,
Further,
bunny
unlike vacuum
knows.
tubes made of glass and with carefully suspended fragile components, transistors were solid material, known as a solid-state component. Almost immediately, transistors could be made smaller than the smallest
Solid-state.
possible relays of vacuum tubes.
Like a solid state drive?
This led to dramatically smaller and cheaper computers, like the IBM 608, released in 1957.
And
The
then, where's my notepad? Oh no, it's not here. Over here? Notepad, no. No. Solid state.
fully transistor-powered commercially available computer. It contained 3,000 transistors and could perform 4,500 additions, or roughly 80 multiplications or divisions every second. IBM soon transitioned all of its computing products to transistors, bringing transistor-based computers into offices and eventually homes. Today, computers use transistors that are smaller than 50 nanometers in size.
Okay, so
For
so
reference, a
far
supercomputer
we
is roughly
have
100,000
mechanical
nanometers big, and they're not
arms,
only
which
incredibly small, they're super fast.
which
They
breaks
exist
down
space
really
millions of
quickly.
times per second,
And then
for
the
decades.
second
A lot of this transistor
generation,
and
what the
semiconductor
second
development happened in
generation
Silicon
of
Valley,
the
from San Francisco to San Jose,
successor
California.
is
Since the most common material used to
the
create semiconductors is silicon,
diode,
this
which
became
is a
known as
vacuum
Silicon Valley.
tube.
Even William Shockley moved there,
And
founding Shockley
then the
Semiconductor.
last
His employees
one
later
is a
founded
solid
Fairchild
state
Semiconductor, whose employees
component
later
known
founded Intel,
as
the world's largest computer
a
maker today. Okay, so we've gone from relays to vacuum tubes to transistors. We can turn electricity on and off really, really, really fast. But how do we get from transistors to actually computing something, especially if we don't have motors and gears? That's what we're going to cover over the next few episodes. Thanks for watching. See you next week. Crash Course Computer Science is produced in association with PBS Digital Studios. At their channel, you can check out playlists of shows like Braincraft, Community, and PBS Infinite Series. This episode was filmed at the Chad and Stacey Underdog Studio in
I
Indianapolis.
want to watch TV.
My work is easy because I use Click.
No. No ad. Okay, next.
Hi, I'm Carrie Ann, and welcome to Crash Course Computer Science.
Hi,
Today we start our journey up the ladder of
Carrie
abstraction,
Ann.
where we leave behind the simplicity
We're
of being
on
able
a
to see and
third
gear, and daily abilities to some increasingly
video.
complex systems. Last episode, we talked about how computers evolved from electromechanical devices that often
Thank
had
you
decimal
for the
representation numbers,
follow,
like those represented by
Mike.
2-point gear, to electronic computers with transistors that can turn the flow of
Michael,
electricity
Mike
on and off.
Phantom?
Unfortunately, even with just two states of
Phantom?
electricity, we can represent importing information. We
Yes,
call this
Phantom?
representation binary, which literally means of two states. In the same way a bicycle has two wheels, or two
Wait,
states of electricity, we can represent
I got
importing information.
distracted.
We call this representation binary, which
Binary.
literally means of two states. In the same way a
States.
bicycle has two wheels, or a biped has two legs. You might think two states isn't a lot to work with, and you're right,
Binaural.
but it's exactly what you need for representing values true
Binary.
and false. In computers, an on state when electricity is flowing represents true. In off state, no electricity flowing represents false. You can also
Bisexual.
write binary as ones and zeros instead of twos and falses. They're just different
Buy me potatoes. Wait, what else start with by? Bicycle, duh. What else though? I don't
expressions of
remember.
the same signal. But we'll talk about that in the next episode. Now, it is actually possible to use transistors for more than just turning electrical current on and off, and to allow for different levels of current. Some early electronic computers used three states, including the previous five states. The problem is, the more intermediate states there are, the harder it is to keep them separate. If your smartphone battery starts running low,
No. Wait, how do you pronounce it?
that's three states, and even Quinary using five states. The
Quinary. What about 4? So there's no 4? Why there's no 4? I don't get it. Quinary. Also, Quinary system seems really complicated. I don't
problem
get
is,
it.
the more intermediate states there are, the harder it is to keep them all separate. If your smartphone battery starts running low, or there's electrical noise because someone's running a microwave nearby, the signals can get mixed up. And this problem only gets worse with transistors changing states millions of times per second. So placing two signals as far apart as possible, using just on and off, gives us the most distinct signal to minimize these issues. Another reason computers use binary is that an entire branch of mathematics already existed that dealt exclusively with true and false values, and it had figured out all the necessary rules and operations for manipulating them. It's called Boolean algebra. George Boole, from which Boolean
Boolean
algebra got its name,
algebra.
was a self-taught English mathematician in the 1800s.
One of the
He was
data
interested in
type,
representing logical statements that
Boolean.
went under, over, and beyond Aristotle's
And then
logic,
there's
which was
Boolean
unsurprisingly grounded in philosophy.
logic.
Boole's approach allowed truth to be systematically and formally proven through logic.
What up, 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 what up,
In
what
regular
up,
algebra,
what up.
the type you probably learned in high school, the values of variables are numbers, and operations on those numbers are things like addition and multiplication. But in Boolean algebra, the values of variables are true and false, and the operations are logical. There are three fundamental operations in Boolean
True,
algebra:
false,
a not,
favor.
an and, or operation. And these operations
Isn't that also exclusive or so XOR or wait, hold on.
variables are true and false. And the operations are logical. There are three
Horses.
fundamental operations.
And or not. We're not including exclusive or? I thought they were more logical Boolean operators. Isn't that also just 3? Simple Boolean operators and or not are simple capitalized commands used in databases and search engine to refine, narrow, or broaden search results. By connecting keywords, they enable precise, relative information retrieval, acting as logical tools to include or exclude specific terms. What? Was that really just 3? Why did I feel like there are more than that? And or not parenthesis. Oh, quotation mark. Okay, I mean, if you put it that way, I guess.
In Boolean algebra, a not, an and an or operation. And these operations turn out to be really useful, so we're going to look at them individually. A not takes a single Boolean value, either true or false, and negates it. It flips true to false, false to true. We can write out a little logic table that shows the original
I hated that Elegation was doing... What was it? Mathematical thinking? Yeah, introduction to mathematical thinking. I still have a welcome introduction of mathematical thinking. I don't know to think about the thing. Okay, I'll finish this first.
Now here's the cool part. We can easily build Boolean logic out of transistors. As we discussed last episode, transistors are really just electrically controlled switches. They have 3 wires, 2 electrodes, and 1 control wire. When you apply electricity to the control wire, it lets current flow through from one electrode through the transistor to the other electrode. This is a lot like a spigot on a pipe. Open the tap, water flows. Close the tap, water shuts off. You can think of the control wire as an input, and the wire coming from the bottom electrode is the output. So with a single transistor, we have one input and one output. If we turn the input on, the output is also on because the current can flow through it. If we turn the input off, the output is also off, and the current can no longer pass through. Or in Boolean terms, when the input is true, the output is true, and when the input is false, the output is also false. Which again, we can show on the logic table. This isn't a very exciting circuit.
True, false. True,
but we can modify this circuit just a little bit to create a not. Instead of having the output wire at the end of the transistor, we can move it before. If we turn the input on the transistor, it allows
So true become false, false becomes true.
Would be like if all the water in your house
True
was
is
flowing out of a
false,
huge
false is
hose, there wasn't
true.
enough pressure left in the shower. So in this case, if the input is on, output is on. When we turn off the transistor, the current is flowing down into the ground. So instead, current flows through the output wire. So the input will be off and the output will be on. And this matches our logic table for not. So congrats, we just built a circuit that computes not. We call them not gates, and we call them gates because they're controlled by the current. The and Boolean operation takes 2 inputs, but still has a single output. In this case, the output is only true if both inputs are true. Think about it like telling the truth. For example, let's take the statement, my name is Carrie Ann, and I'm wearing blue dress. Both of those facts are true, so the whole statement is true. But if I said my name is Carrie Ann and I'm wearing pants, that would be false because I'm not wearing pants. The Carrie Ann part is true, but the true and the false is true false. If I were to reverse that statement, it would still obviously be false. And if I were to tell you 2 complete lies, that is also false. And again, we can write all of these combinations out in a table. To build an AND gate, we need 2 transistors connected together so we have our 2 inputs and 1 output. If we turn on just transistor A, current won't flow because the current is stopped by transistor B. Alternatively, if transistor B is on but transistor A is off, same thing, the current can't get through. Only if transistor A and transistor B are on does the output wire have current. The last Boolean operator is OR, where only one input has to be true for the output to be true. For example, my name is
Let me go.
A, current won't flow because the current is stopped by transistor B. Alternatively, if transistor B is on but transistor A is off, same thing, the current can't get through. Only if transistor A and transistor B are on does the output wire have current. The last Boolean operator is OR, where only one input has to be true
Why
for the
is that?
output.
Am I hearing stuff? Looks like that's humming. You must be tripping. Yeah, whatever.
My name is Margaret Hamilton, or I'm wearing a blue dress. This is a true statement because although I'm not Margaret Hamilton, unfortunately, I am wearing a blue. The current can't get through. Only false. And again, we can write all of these combinations because of B wearing a blue dress. Facts are true. The only thing in parallel, we run wires from the current source to both transistors. We use this little arc to note that the wires jump over one another, even though they look like they cross. If both transistors are turned off, the current is prevented from flowing to the output, so the output is also off. Now, if we turn on just transistor A, current can flow to the output. Same thing if transistor A is on, but transistor B is on. Basically, if A or B is on, the output is also on. Also, if both transistors are on, the output is still on. Okay, now we've got not and
I
or
am
gates. We can combine
following.
two transistors and move up a layer of
I
abstraction.
get the true false table, but
representing them and thinking about them this way allows us to build even bigger.
I didn't know what it looks like in the grid.
All the mess of transistors and wires is still there. For example, another use of
Ansograph? Integraph? Coppergraph?
XOR is like a regular OR, but with one difference.
Why am I
If both
just
inputs are true,
switching
the XOR
up
is
with
false.
my
It's called an
preposition?
Just remember that all of the mess of transistors and wires is still there. For example, another
I still remember that last week? No, 2 weeks ago I got confused with proper nouns and pronouns. Yeah, that happened. That was embarrassing. And very confusing for people talking to me.
useful Boolean operation.
Exclusive. Need.
XOR is like a regular OR, but with one difference. If both inputs are true, the XOR is false. The only time an XOR is true is when one input is true and the other input is false. It's like when you go out to dinner and your meal comes with a side salad or a soup. Sadly, you can't have both. I'm building this from transistors, it's pretty confusing, but we can show how an XOR is created from our 3 basic Boolean gates. We know we have 2 inputs, A and B, and 1 output. Let's start with an OR gate, since the logic table looks almost identical.
Okay. Oh, can it be that you're using what is it? What was it? OR gate, and then when it's both true and both false, you use a NOT gate. Is it correct?
There's only one problem. When A and B are true, the logic is different from OR, and we need to output false. To do this, we need to add some additional gates. If we add an AND gate and the input is true and true, the output will be true. This isn't what we want. But if we add a NOT immediately after, this will flip it to false. Okay, now if we add a final AND gate and send it that value along with the
Holy moly. Okay, wait, which way am I looking at? Okay, we start from the left. So we have input A and B. If both are true, and then we negate it so it becomes false. And then hold on, and then the second one is A is true, and then B is wait, oh, okay. So true, and then that you don't need false, because if you don't have this light up, then you'll be false. So just this one, and then then keeps traveling, and then it becomes true. Okay, and then if this is false, so we don't look at this one and this one, and then true, and then go back, and then goes here, and then if both are false, then it doesn't even line up, so then it's false. Okay.
We'll take in false and true. And since and needs both values to be true, its output is false. That's the first row of our logic table. If we work through the remaining input combinations, we can see this Boolean logic circuit does implement an exclusive OR. And XOR turns out to be a very useful component, and we'll get to it in another episode. So useful, in fact, engineers gave it its own symbol too, an OR gate with a smile. But most importantly, we can now connect
smile.
and not have to worry about the individual logic gates that make it up.
Can't
All the
stop
transistors that
looking
make
at
up
the little
or how
creeper in the
electrons flow
back.
through the conductor, moving up another layer of abstraction. When
Or
computer
the
engineers design
puppet.
processors, they
It
rarely
looks
work
so
in tandem. Instead,
fluffy
much
for
larger
some
blocks, like logic
reason.
gates, and even larger components made up of logic gates, which we'll discuss in future episodes. And
I
computing
still
are
remember there was
so
one
often you think about how the logic that you're
video
programming
where
actually
they were
makes sense.
talking
We've
about
also moved from thinking about more
pixel
electrons,
and their value. I still don't get that one.
With just the logic gates in this episode, we
Wait,
could build a
I
video
have to
evaluating complex
rewatch
logic
it.
systems. Like if name is John Green and after 5 p.m. or is weekend and near Pizza Hut, then John will want pizza equals true. And with that, I'm starving. I'll see you next week. Crash Course Computer Science.
Wait,
Like growth science, ACS reactions, and the art assignment. This episode was filmed at the Chad and Stacey Elbot Studio in Indianapolis, Indiana, and it was made with the help of all these nice people and our wonderful graphics team, Thought Cafe. Thanks for watching, and try turning it off and then back on again.
Before Monday.com,
Yeah.
Dan used to walk
Yeah.
from desk to desk,
Yeah.
checking where things stood and who needed to approve
Yeah.
what.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
project managers. But since he
Yeah.
discovered Monday.com,
Yep.
Hi, I'm Carrie Ann. This is Crash Course Computer Science. And today we're going to talk about how computers store and represent
Ba-
numerical data.
ba- da-
We've got stuff like that. But don't worry, every single one
ba-
already knows exactly what you need to know.
na-
So
na-
last episode we talked about how transistors can use logic gates, which can
na-
evaluate Boolean statements. And in Boolean algebra, only two binary values, true or false. But if we only have two values, how will we represent information beyond just these two values? That's where the math comes in. So as we mentioned last episode, a single binary value can be used to represent a number. Instead of true and false, we can call these two states 1 and 0, which is actually incredibly useful. And if we want to represent larger things, we just need to add more binary digits. This works exactly the same way as the decimal numbers that we're all familiar with. With decimal numbers, there are only 10 possible values a single digit can be, 0 through 9. And to get numbers larger than 9, we
Wait,
just start adding
hold on. Can my subtitle?
more
Thank
digits to the front. We can do
you.
the same with binary. For example, let's take the number 263. What does this number actually represent? Well, it means we've got two 100s, 6 10s, and 3 1s. If you add those all together,
Okay.
we've got 263.
I'm
Notice that each column is a
following.
different multiplier. In this case, it's 100, 10, and 1. Each
Wait,
multiplier is 10
what are
times
we doing? Representing numbers and oh, I didn't. I dropped something. I got my little mic. A tiny little itty bitty bike. I should be done charging. Let me put it back into the box. Ba-da-ba-bum. Ba-da-ba-da-bum. Okay, representing number and letters with binary.
larger than 1 to the right. That's because each column has 10 possible digits to work with, 0 through 9, after which you have to carry 1 to the next column. For this reason, it's called base 10 notation, also called decimal, since decimal means 10. And binary works exactly the same way.
And
It's
then
just base 2.
there's
That's because there are only two possible digits in
hexadecimal,
binary, 1 and 0.
binary,
This means each multiplier has to be
and
2 times
what
larger
else
than
are
the previous
there?
one. Instead of hundreds,
I
tens, and ones,
forgot.
we now have 4s, 2s, and 1s. Take, for example, the binary number 101.
I'm
This means we have
sleepy,
1
I can't
0 2s, and 1 1. Add those all
sleep.
together, and we've got the number 5 in base 10. But to represent larger numbers, binary needs a lot more digits. Taking this number in binary, we can convert it to decimal in the same way. We have 1 times 100.
I have to do it for homework. I don't want to do this again.
0 times 64, 1 times 32, 1 times 16, 0 times 8, 1 times 4,
Yes,
1 times
you
2,
know
1
why
times
you're
1,
doing
which all adds up to
this.
183. Math with binary
Binary
is hard either.
sucks.
Take, for example, decimal addition of 183 plus 19. First we add 3 plus 9, that's 12, so we put 2 as the sum and carry 1 to the tens column. Now we add 8 plus 1 plus the 1 we carried, that's 10. So the sum is 0, carry 1. Finally we add 1 plus the 1 we carried, which equals 2. So the total sum is 202. Here's the same sum, but in binary. Just as before, we start with the ones column. Adding 1 plus 1 results in 2, even in binary. But there's no symbol 2, so we use 1 0 and put 0 as our sum and carry the 1. Just like in our decimal example. 1 plus 1 plus the 1 carried equals 3, or 1 1 in
So you
binary.
have
So we put the
1
sum as
and
1 and
carry
carry
the
1 again.
1.
So we end up with this number, which is the same as the number 202 in base 10. Each of these binary digits, 1 or 0, is called a
Money,
bit.
money.
So in these last few examples, we were using 8-bit numbers with their lowest, which is the same as the number 202 in base 10. Each of these binary digits, 1 or 0, is called a bit. So in these last few examples, we were using 8-bit numbers with
Bit and then bite. Bit and then bite. And then I keep misspelling bite.
their lowest value of 0 and highest value of 255, which requires all 8 bits to be set to 1. That's 256 different values, or 2 to the 8th power. You might have heard of 8-bit computers or 8-bit graphics or audio. These were computers that did most of their operations in chunks of 8 bits, but 256 different values isn't a lot to work with. So again, things like 8-bit games were limited to just 256 different colours for their graphics. And 8 bits is such a common size in computing, it has a special word, a byte. A byte is 8 bits. If you've got 10 bytes, it means you've really got 80 bits. You've heard of kilobytes, megabytes, gigabytes, and so on. These prefixes denote different scales of data. Just like 1 kilogram is 1,000 grams, 1 kilobyte is 1,000 bytes, or really 8,000 bits. Mega is a million bytes, and giga is a billion bytes. Today, you might even have a hard drive that has 1
Wait. Kilo, mega. No, yeah, kilo, mega, and then giga. And then tera. Okay,
terabyte storage. That's 8 trillion ones and zeros. But hold on, that's not always true. In binary, a kilobyte has 2 to the power of 10 bytes, or 1,024. 1,000 is also right when talking about kilobytes, but we should acknowledge that isn't the only correct definition. You've probably also heard the term 32 or 64 in computers. You're almost certainly using one right now. What this means is that they operate in chunks of 32 or 64 bits. That's a lot of bits. The largest number
I
you can
have
represent with
not
32 bits.
seen a Windows operating system on disk
You're
in
always certainly using one.
forever. Holy crap! When was this video created? This is history. 8 years ago, they still had Windows 10 on CD or DVD. Wait, it's CD, right? I can never tell the difference between a Blu-ray, DVD, and CD. At least I know what a VCR is. Even though it's kind of useless knowing that now.
Right now. What this means is that they operate in chunks of 32 or 64 bits. That's a lot of bits. The largest number you can represent with 32 bits is just under 4.3 billion, which is 32 ones in binary. This is why our Instagram photos are so smooth and pretty. They're composed of millions of colours because computers today use 32-bit colour graphics. Of course, not every bit is a positive number, like my bank account in college. So we need a way to represent positive and negative numbers. Most computers use the first bit as a sign, 1 for negative, 0 for positive numbers, and then use the remaining 31 bits for the number itself. That gives us a range of roughly plus or minus 2 billion. While this is a pretty big range of numbers, it's not enough for many tasks. There are 7 billion people on the Earth, and the US national debt is almost $20 trillion after all. This is why 64-bit numbers are useful. The largest value a 64-bit number can represent is around 9.2 quintillion. That's a lot of possible numbers, and we'll hopefully stay above the US national
Wait,
debt
hold on. I
for a
feel
while.
like I missed
While this is a
something.
pretty big range of numbers, it's not enough for many tasks. There are 7 billion people on the Earth, and the US national debt is almost $20 trillion after all. This is why 60.
What is the current US debt now? 20 trillion. 20 trillion. The US national debt clock. That's a lot of comma. almost 39 trillion? Is that 39? Wait, hold on. How many commas do you guys have? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. So it's 39 trillion. Holy moly, that is impressive. Ooh, what about Korea? Korea debt. I'm curious. Does it show? It does not show. Korea national debt. Yo, what else not working? That's how much long.
4-bit numbers are useful. The largest value a 64-bit number can represent is around 9.2 quintillion. That's a lot of possible numbers, and we'll hopefully stay above the US national debt for a while. Most importantly, as we'll discuss in a later episode, computers must label locations in their memory, known as addresses, in order to store and retrieve values. As computer memory has grown to gigabytes and terabytes, that's trillions of bytes. It was necessary to have 64-bit memory addresses as well. In addition to negative and positive
Next
numbers, computers must store numbers and the whole numbers, like 12.7, 10.14, or maybe the Zardic 439.
Oh my god.
These are called
Oh
floating
my
point numbers
god.
because
You're the first one who says anything about it. I gotta show you. Holy crap. It's my new one. And it's so freaking double. Look at it. Look at it. This color's so pretty. Look at this here. It got purple woods and purple tips. And it's pink. Yeah. I think they made the lollipop, even though it's actually more like a donut. Because it has donuts on the dress. It is so cute. This is probably the only one that has the little hair sticking up on the top because I feel like it matches. But oh my god, look at this, 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 look at it, look at it, look at it, look at it, look at it. Look at how cute it is. Okay, I'm done. Not really. I'll come back later though. I'll make you guys suffer. I'll make you guys suffer whenever I get the chance.
a point can float around in the middle of a number. Several methods have been developed to represent floating point numbers, the most common of which is the IEEE.
Look. Look at this face. Look at it. Oh, wait. My computer's glitching. It's probably gonna crash in 2 seconds. Yay! I can. No, yeah, I can't. What is going on? Today is acting funky. Funky. Funky cookie. Ooh. I figured out a way. I figured out how to do this. Ta-da! Oh my god, look at this. Look at how smooth it is. Look at the purple. Look at the ears. I love this dress too. I think I had another one with a similar outfit, but I didn't end up using it. And look at this hair. It's so cute. Look at the eyes. Freaking adorable. 110% adorable. Of course it's not. I made it.
The only people bad at naming things. In essence, this standard stores decimal values sort of like scientific notation. For example,
I make
625.9 can be written as 0.6259 times 10 to the power of 3. There are two important numbers here. The 0.6259 is called the significand, and 3 is the exponent. In a 32-bit floating point number, the first thing is used to define the number, positive or negative. The next 8 bits are used to store the exponent, and the remaining 23 bits are used to store the significand. Okay, we've talked a lot about numbers, but your name is probably standard stores have been developed to represent, or maybe the Zardic 43989.1, known as addresses. In order to numbers, and will hopefully
Hold on.
plus or minus 2 per day.
I did. I got too excited about my
You
dress.
should acknowledge it isn't the only correct definition. You've probably also heard the term 32-bit or 64-bit computers. You're almost certainly using one right now. What this means is that they operate in chunks of 32 or 64 bits. That's a lot of bits. The largest number you can represent with 32 bits is just under 4.3 billion, which is 32 ones in binary. This is why our Instagram photos are so smooth and pretty. They're composed of millions of colours because computers today use 32-bit colour graphics. Of course, not everything is a positive number, like my bank account in college. So we need a way to represent positive and negative numbers. Most computers use the first
I
bit
feel
for sign,
that.
1 for negative, 0 for positive numbers, and then use the remaining 31 bits for the number itself. That gives us a range of roughly plus or minus 2 billion. While this is a pretty big range of numbers, it's not enough for many tasks. There are 7 billion people on the Earth, and the US national debt is almost $20 trillion after all. This is why 64-bit numbers are useful. The largest value a 64-bit number can represent is around
I'm
9.2
sweating a
billion.
lot
That's a lot of
today.
numbers, and will hopefully stay above the US national debt for a while. Most importantly, as we'll discuss in a later episode, computers must label
I feel
locations
like
in
I'm
memory,
paying
known as
salt.
addresses, in order to store and retrieve values. As computer memory has grown to gigabytes and terabytes, that's trillions of bytes. It is necessary for 64-bit memory addresses as well. In addition to negative and positive numbers,
Sausage
computers store
drive.
numbers that are not whole numbers, like 12.7 and 3.14, or maybe the stardate 43989.1. These are called
Start
floating
it. Wait, what was that little thing that
positive
popped
numbers.
up?
Computers must deal with numbers that are not whole numbers, like 12.7 and 3.14, or maybe the stardate 43989.1.
Start it. Oh, it is Star Trek. Jeez, who's this kid? This from TOS, isn't it? I think so.
989.1. These are
Come
called
on,
floating
little
point numbers
pumpkin
because the decimal
oils.
point can float around in the middle of a number. Several methods have been developed to represent floating point numbers, the most common of which is the IEEE 754 standard, and you thought historians were the only people bad at naming things. In essence, this standard stores decimal values sort of like scientific notation. For example, 625.9 can be written as 0.6259 times 10 to the power of 3. There are two important numbers here. The 0.6259 is called the significand, and 3 is the exponent. In a 32-bit floating point number, the first bit is used for the sign of the number, positive or negative. The next 8 bits are used to store the exponent, and the remaining 23 bits are used to store the significand. Okay, we've talked a lot about numbers, but your name is probably composed of letters, so it's really useful for computers to also have a way to represent text. However, rather than have a special form of storage for letters, computers simply use numbers to represent letters. The most straightforward approach might be to simply number the letters of the alphabet, A being 1, B being 2, C 3, and so on. In fact, Francis Bacon, the famous English writer, used 5 bit sequences to encode all 26 letters of the English alphabet. So
Wait,
C being
Francis
1, B being 2,
Bacon?
C 3, and so on. In fact,
Is
Francis
that famous? I'm gonna look him up. Francis Bacon. Is bacon actually popular in France? I'm gonna look up. Is bacon popular in France? Where is bacon most popular? They have a whole ass website for that? Holy moly. Global bacon craze. Where is bacon most popular? As a version of a breakfast double to beloved invader celebrated in various percent worldwide. Okay. I don't know. You guys like bacon? I'm okay with bacon. I like ham a little bit more. I like prosciutto. I like the Black Forest ham. What else? Cultural significance. Holy moly! Americans eat 80 pounds per person per year of bacon? I don't get it. I don't get it. Okay, what about French? French is bacon. Oh, it's not even on this website. We got USA with streaky bacon, UK back bacon, Canada Canadian bacon, Spain. Don't know how to pronounce that word. Water bomb and Italy. Okay. Francis Bacon, English philosopher and statesman. What is a statesman? What's a statement? S-T-A-T. Oh, my God. The man who's a leader in national or international affairs. Oh, okay, cool. Cool. Don't really care. It's not like I'm in the UK. Holy moly! The English title is long, but you can refer him as Francis Bacon. But the Chinese translation? Why does it need to be so long? Why? Oh, okay. Born in the 16th century. Whatever. Ha. Ba. Bakong. Bacon.
Francis Bacon, the famous English writer, used 5-bit sequences to encode all 26 letters of the English alphabet to send secret messages back in the 1600s. And 5 bits can store 32 possible values. So that's enough.
Wait, secret
Use 5-bit
messages or
sequences to
secret
encode all 26
messages?
letters of the English alphabet to send secret messages back in the 1600s. And 5 bits can store 32 possible values. So that's enough for 26 letters, but not enough for punctuation, digits, and upper and lowercase letters. Enter ASCII, the American standard code for information interchange. Invented in 1963, ASCII was a 7-bit code, enough to store 128 different values. With this expanded range, it can encode capital letters, lowercase letters, digits 0 through 9, and symbols like the @ sign and punctuation marks. For example, lowercase a is represented by the number
We
97,
don't
while capital A is
use
65,
ASCII,
and
we use the Unicode Japanese fashion band.
Because ASCII was such an early standard, it became widely used and critically allowed different computers by different companies
but it
to
does
change
not
data. Its ability to
allow
universally
the
change information
coding
to
of
interoperability. However, it did have a major limitation. It was really only presented in English. Fortunately, there are 8 bits instead of 7, and it soon became possible to use codes 128
like
to 255
Japanese,
previously
Korean,
used in national characters.
Chinese,
In the US, those extra numbers were largely used to encode original symbols, like mathematical notation,
Tagalog.
graphical elements, and
But
common accentuated
Tagalog-
characters. On the other hand, while the Latin characters were used
Tagalog doesn't count. Babayan. Well, no, okay, maybe not Tagalog, but definitely Babayan. I think.
universally, Russian computers use the extra codes to encode Cyrillic characters, and Greek computers Greek letters and so on. And national character codes work pretty well for most countries. The problem was, if you opened an email written in Latvian on a Turkish computer, the result was completely incomprehensible, and things totally broke the rise of computers in Asia, as languages like Chinese and Japanese have thousands of characters. There was no way to encode all those characters in 8 bits. In response, each country invented multi-byte encoding schemes, all of which were mutually incompatible. The Japanese were so familiar with this encoding problem that they even had a special name for it, Moji Bake, which means scrambled
Boji Bake. Bakemono.
text. And so it was born.
Wait, Moji Bake. Moji Bake. Moji Bake or transformation. Like a Neko Bake is like the famous name Neko Bake. Bake Neko. Bake Neko. Bake Neko. Neko Mata. I like Neko Mata. But Bake Neko is cool too. But definitely Neko Mata. It's got 2 tails. But it doesn't like more tails. I like it. Fluffy. Like fluffy though. Moji Bake. I don't have an empty tab open. Oh well. Why do I have another empty tab open? That does not make sense. Aww. 3 classes. I didn't know I had this open.
Unicode, one format to rule them all. Devised in 1992 to finally do away with all of the different international schemes, it replaced them with one universal encoding scheme. The most common version of Unicode uses 16 bits with space for over 1 million codes, enough for every single character from every language ever used. More than 120,000 of them in over 100 character script, plus space for mathematical symbols and even graphical characters like emoji. And in the same way that ASCII defines a scheme for encoding letters as binary numbers, other file formats like MP3s or GIFs use binary numbers to encode sounds or colours of a pixel in our photos, movies and music. Most importantly, under the hood, it all comes down to long sequences of bits. Text messages, this YouTube video, every web page on the internet, and even your computer's operating system are nothing but long sequences of ones and zeros. So next week, we'll start talking about how your computer starts manipulating those
Time
binary
is
sequences.
so
For our first two
later.
taste of computation. Thanks for watching. See you next week. Crash Course Computer Science is produced in association with PBS Digital Studios. At their channel, you can check out plays and shows like Physics Girl,
I'll see you
PBS Space
in
Time. This episode was filmed at the Channel
30
Studios Studio in
seconds.
Indianapolis, Indiana, and it was made with the help of all these nice people and our wonderful graphics team, Thought Cafe. That's where we're going to have to talk to Catch Fire. See you next week.
The Library of
It's made with the help of all these
Congress.
nice people and our wonderful graphics team, Thought Cafe. That's where we're going to
The Library of Congress. Wikimedia Commons.
have to halt in Catch Fire. See you next week.
You.
No ad. Also. Oh no, my content was removed. Okay, not sure which one. And Kelly and
So last
High
episode,
School
we talked about how
Computer
numbers can be
Science.
represented binary, like 0010 and
Binaries.
1010 is 42 in decimal.
hold on, I got an idea. There we go. I'm not go. I'm not sure. Is it working?
Representing and storing numbers is an important function of a computer, but the real goal is computation, or manipulating numbers in a structured and purposeful way, like adding 2 numbers together. These operations are handled by a computer's arithmetic and logic unit, but most people call it by its street name, the ALU. The ALU is the mathematical
Street name,
way, like adding 2
ALU.
numbers together. These operations are handled by a computer's arithmetic
Computers arithmetic and logic unit.
and logic unit, but most people call it by its street name, the ALU. The ALU is the mathematical brain of a computer. When you understand an ALU's design and function, you'll understand a fundamental part of modern computers. It's the only thing that does all of the computation in a
That's
computer.
the
So basically,
thing I
everything
forgot
uses it.
already.
First though, look at this beauty. This is perhaps the most famous ALU ever, the Intel 74181. When it was released in 1970, it was the first complete ALU that fit entirely inside a single chip, which was a huge engineering feat at the time. So today we're going to take those Boolean logic gates we learned about last week to build a simple ALU circuit with much of the same functionality as that 74181. And over the next few episodes, we'll use this to construct a computer from scratch. So it's going to get a little bit complicated, but I think you guys can handle it. Unit. Let's start with the arithmetic unit, which is responsible for handling all numerical operations in a computer, like addition and subtraction. It also does a bunch of other simple things, like add 1 to a number, which is called an increment operation, but we'll talk about those later. Today we're going to focus on the pièce de résistance, the crème de la crème of operations, that underlines almost everything, like add 1 to a number, which is called an increment operation, but we'll talk about those later. Today we're going to focus on the pièce de résistance, the crème de la crème of operations, that underlines almost everything else a computer does, adding 2 numbers together. We could build this circuit entirely out of individual transistors, but that would get confusing really fast. So instead, as we talked about in episode 3, we can use a high level of abstraction and build our components out of logic gates. In this case, AND, OR, NOT, and XOR gates. The simplest adding circuit that we can build takes 2 binary digits and adds them together. So we have 2 inputs, A and B, and 1 output, which is the sum of those 2 digits. Just to clarify, A, B, and the output are all single bits. There are only 4 possible input combinations. The first 3 are 0 plus 0 equals 0, 1 plus 0 equals 1, and 0 plus 1 equals 1. Remember that in binary, 1 is the same as true, and 0 is the same as false. So this set of inputs exactly matches the Boolean logic of an XOR gate, and we can use it as our 1-bit adder. But the 4th input combination, 1 plus 1, is a special case. 1 plus 1 is 2, obviously, but there's no 2-digit in binary. So as we talked about last episode, the result is 0, and the 1 is carried to the next column. So the sum is really 1, 0 in binary. Now, the output of our XOR gate is partially correct. 1 plus 1 output 0, but we need an extra output wire for that carry bit. The carry bit is only true when the inputs are 1 and 1, because that's the only time when the result is bigger than 1 bit can store. And conveniently, we have a gate for that, an AND gate, which is only true when both inputs are true. So we'll add that to our circuit too. And that's it. This circuit is called a half adder. It's not that complicated, it's 2 logic gates. But let's subtract away even this level of detail.
I was pouring water.
Takes 2 binary digits and adds them together. So we have 2 inputs, A and B, and 1 output, which is the sum of those 2 digits. Just to clarify, A, B, and the output are all single bits. There are only 4 possible input combinations. The first 3 are 0 plus 0 equals 0, 1 plus 0 equals 1, and 0 plus 1 equals 1. Remember that in binary, 1 is the same as true, and 0 is the same as false. So this set of inputs exactly matches the Boolean logic of an XOR gate, and we can use it as our 1-bit adder. But the 4th input combination, 1 plus 1, is a special case. 1 plus 1 is 2, obviously, but there's no 2-digit in binary. So as we talked about last episode, the result is 0, and the 1 is carried to the next column. So the sum is really 1, 0 in binary. Now, the output of our XOR gate is partially correct. 1 plus 1 output 0, but we need an extra output wire for that carry bit. The carry bit is only true when the inputs are 1 and 1, because that's the only time when the result is bigger than 1 bit can store. And conveniently, we have a gate for that, an AND gate, which is only true when both inputs are true. So we'll add that to our circuit too. And that's it. This circuit is called a half adder. It's not that complicated, just 2 logic gates. But let's abstract away even this level of detail and encapsulate our newly minted half adder as its own component. With 2 inputs, with A and B, and 2 outputs, the sum and the carry bits. This takes us to another level of abstraction. I feel like I say that a lot. I wonder if this is going to become a thing. Anyway, if you want to add more than 1 plus 1, we're going to need a full adder. That half adder left us with a carry bit as output. That means that when we move on to the next column in a multi-column addition, and every column after that, we're going to have to add 3 bits together, not 2. A full adder is a bit more complicated. It takes 3 bits as inputs, A, B, and C. So the maximum possible input is 1 plus 1 plus 1, which equals 1 carry out 1. So we still only need 2 output wires, sum and carry. We can build a full adder using half adders. To do this, we use a half adder to add A plus B, just like before. We then feed that result and input C into a second half adder. Lastly, we need an OR gate to check if either one of the carry bits was true. That's it. We just that half adder
I'm not
with A
fine.
and B, and 2 outputs, the sum and the carry bits. This takes us to another level of abstraction. I feel like I say that a lot. I wonder if this is going to become a thing. Anyway, if you want to add more than 1 plus 1, we're going to need a full adder. That half adder left us with a carry bit as output. That means that when we move on to the next column in a multi-column addition, and every column after that, we're going to have to add 3 bits together, not 2. A full adder is a bit more complicated. It takes 3 bits as inputs, A, B, and C. So the maximum possible input is 1 plus 1 plus 1, which equals 1 carry out 1. So we still only need 2 output wires, sum and carry. We can build a full adder using half adders. To do this, we use a half adder to add A plus B, just like before. We then feed that result and input C into a second half adder. Lastly, we need an OR gate to check if either one of the carry bits was true. That's it. We just made a full adder. Again, we can go up a level of abstraction, wrap up this full adder as its own component. We need an OR gate to check if either one of the carry bits was true.
I'm trying to get this. So first, wait, should it be? Then I bring it down, put it in this. Should be. Should be. Which way am I looking at? Look at. Okay. Huh? Huh? Shouldn't carry be on this side? Obvious.
True. That's it. We just made a full adder. Again, we can go up a level of abstraction, wrap up this full adder as its own component. It takes 3 inputs, adds them, and outputs the sum of the carry if there is one.
If you have CalFresh, Medi-Cal, or
No way.
Armed with our new components, we can now build a circuit that takes 2 8-bit numbers, let's call them A and B, and adds them together. Let's start with the very first bit of A and B, which we'll call A0 and B0. At this point, there is no carry bit to deal with, because this is our first addition. So we can use our half adder to add those 2 bits together. The output is sum 0. Now we want to add A1 and B1 together. It's possible there was a carry from the previous addition of A0 and B0. So this time, we need to use a full adder that also inputs the carry bit. We output this result as sum 1. Then, we take any carry from this full adder and run it into the next full adder that handles A2 and B2. And we just keep doing this in a big chain until all 8 bits have been added. Notice how the carry bits ripple forward to each subsequent adder. For this reason, this is called an 8-bit ripple carry adder. Notice how our last full adder has a carry out. If there is a carry into the 9th bit, it means the sum of the 2 numbers is too large to fit into 8 bits. This is called an overflow. In general, an overflow occurs when the result of an addition is too large to be represented by the number of bits you are using. This can usually cause errors and unexpected behavior. Famously, the original Pac-Man arcade game used 8 bits to keep track of what level you were on. This meant that if you made it past level 255, the largest number storable in 8 bits, to level 256, the ALU overflowed. This caused a bunch of errors and glitches, making the level unbeatable. The bug became a rite of passage for the greatest Pac-Man players. So if we want to avoid overflows, we can extend our circuit with more full adders, allowing us to add 16 or 32-bit numbers. This makes overflows less likely to happen, but at the expense of more gates. An additional downside is that it takes a little bit of time for each of the carries to ripple forward. Admittedly, not very much time. Electrons move pretty fast, so we're talking about billionths of a second. That's enough to make a difference in today's fast computers. For this reason, modern computers use a slightly different adding circuit called a carry look-ahead adder, which is faster, but ultimately does exactly the same thing. Adds binary numbers. The ALU's arithmetic unit also has circuits for other math operations, and in general,
Add with K. Add is A and B or sum. Add with K. A and B and K. There are some subject. Field subjective for A of base. Check with flow. Oh. Ah, got it. Field subjective for A of base with our flow. Take it. A is subtracted from 0, keeping a sign. Increment at 1 to
these A operations are always supported. And like our adder, these other operations are built from individual logic gates. Interestingly, it also has
two. All bits of A are passed through unmodified. Oh, okay.
circuits for other math operations, and in general, these 8 operations are always supported. And like our adder, these other operations are built from individual logic gates. Interestingly, you may have noticed that there are no multiply and divide operations. That's because simple ALUs don't have a circuit for this, and instead just perform a series of additions. Let's say you want to multiply 12 by 5. That's the same thing as adding 12 to itself 5 times. So it would take 5 passes through the ALU to do this one multiplication. And this is how many simple processors, like those in your thermostat, TV remote, and microwave, do multiplication. It's slow, but it gets the job done. However, fancier processors like those in your laptop or smartphone have arithmetic units dedicated to circuits for multiplication. And as you might expect, the circuit is more complicated.
Alrighty, I'm back. I thought I was having seminar for photography, but it turns out that I got the right time, I got the right date, but it was for the wrong person. I couldn't watch it. So bummer. Whether not arithmetic and logic unit. So for 1A1, keep mentioning that. So simple. What's that V? Okay. I'm listening. Dishes.
To see if the negative flag was set to true. If it was, we know that A was smaller than B. And finally, there's also a Y attached to the carryout on the adder we built. So if there is an overflow, we'll know about it. This is called the overflow flag. Fancier ALUs will have more flags, but these three flags are universal and frequently used. In fact,
Oh, that's so interesting. I just realized that person sound came from the video. I was wondering what it was.
A subtract B, 0 flag. Basically,
And also
the
it was
operation is algebra.
distracting.
Another level of abstraction. Our 8-bit ALU has two inputs, A and B, each with 8 bits. We also need a way to specify what operation the ALU should perform. For example, addition or subtraction. For that, we use a 4-bit operation code. We'll talk more about this in a later episode, but in brief, 1000 might be the command to add, while 1100 is the command to subtract. Basically, the operation code tells the ALU what operation to perform, and the result of that operation on inputs A and B is an 8-bit output. ALUs also output a series of flags, which are 1-bit outputs of particular states and statuses. For example, if we subtract two numbers and the result is 0, our 0 testing circuit, like I made earlier, sets a 0 flag to true. This is useful if we're trying to determine if two numbers are equal. If we wanted to test if A was less than B, we can use the ALU to calculate A subtract B, and look to see if the negative flag was set to true. If it was, we know that A was smaller than B. And finally, there's also a Y attached to the carryout on the adder we built. So if there is an overflow, we'll know about it. This is called the overflow flag. Fancier ALUs will have more flags, but these three flags are universal and frequently used. In fact, we'll be using them soon in a future episode. So now you know how your computer does all of its basic mathematical operations digitally with no gears or levers required. We're going to use this ALU when we construct our CPU 2 episodes from now. But before that, our computer is going to need some memory. We'll talk about that next week. Crash Course Computer Science is produced in association with PBS Digital Studios. At their channel, you can check out playlists of shows like PBS Audio Channel, Physics World, and Social Smart. This episode was filmed at the Channel Stacy Everbolt Studio in Indianapolis, Indiana, and it was made with the help of all the nice people at our wonderful Gravity Thought Cafe. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later.
One time is about what, 10 minutes? How many
If you
hours
struggle with
that?
focus, this sound
What do you
might
want
change
that
everything.
by 60? Hold on, I can't math right now. Almost 7 hours? Yeah, I'm gonna say 7
Hi,
hours.
I'm
I'm
Carrie
gonna
Ann,
wind
welcome to Crash
up.
Course Computer Science. So last episode, using just logic gates, we built a simple ALU, which performs arithmetic and logic operations, hence the A and the L. But of course, there's not much point in calculating a result only to throw it away. It would be useful to store that value somehow, and maybe even run several operations in a row. That's where computer memory comes in. If you've ever been in the middle of a long RPG campaign on your console, or slogging through a difficult level on Minesweeper on your desktop, and your beloved dog came by tripped and pulled the power cord out the wall, you know the agony of losing all your progress. Condolences. But the reason for your loss is that your console, your laptop, and your computers make use of random access memory or RAM, which stores things like game state, as long as the power stays on. Another type of memory called persistent memory can survive without power, and it's used for different things. But we'll talk about
Consistent.
memory
Hold
later.
on, hold on.
Anything that uses all your
Consistent
progress.
memory. That is like the old hard drive, right? Not the solid state one.
Condolences. But the reason for your loss is that your console, your laptop, and your computers make use of random access memory or RAM, which stores things like game state, as long as the power stays on. Another type of memory called persistent memory can survive without power, and it's used for different things. But we'll talk about the persistence of memory later, like game state, as long as the power stays on. Another type of memory called persistent memory can survive without power, and it's used for different things. But
Persistent memory and random access memory. And persistent memory. Wish I took that note somewhere, but I don't remember now. Or I did not. Maybe I didn't even take notes. Dang. I'm like bad at
we'll talk about the
studying.
systems of memory in a later episode. Today we're going to start small, literally by building a circuit that can store one single bit of information. After that, we'll scale up and build our very own memory module, and we'll combine it with our ALU next time when we finally build our very own CPU. All of the logic circuits we've discussed so far go in one direction, always flowing forward, like our 8-bit ripple adder from last episode. But we can also create circuits that loop back on themselves. Let's try taking an ordinary OR gate and feed the output back into one of its inputs and see what happens. First, let's set both inputs to 0. So 0 or 0 is 0, and so this circuit always outputs 0. If we were to flip input A to 1, 1 or 0...
Okay, let me double check on my to-do list, okay. I still have to do homework, have dinner, refill the humidifier. And mostly stream stuff like update Twitch social media link, update OBS setting. Oh, I also make automatically a new overlay too. Paka paka paka. Paka 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 paka. Paka 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 paka. Paka paka paka.
0 is 1. So now the output of the OR gate is 1. A fraction of a second later, that loops back around into input B. So the OR gate sees that both of its inputs are now 1. 1 or 1 is still 1. So there is no change in output. If we flip input A back to 0, the OR gate still outputs 1. So now we've got a circuit that records a 1 for us. Except we've got a teensy tiny problem. This change is permanent. No matter how hard we try, there's no way to get this circuit to flip back from a 1 to a 0. Now let's look at the same circuit with an AND gate instead. We'll start inputs A and B both at 1. 1 and 1 outputs 1 forever. But if we then flip input A to 0 because it's an AND gate,
Sleep.
the output will go to 0. So this circuit records a 0, the opposite of our other circuit. Like before, no matter what input we apply to input A afterwards, the circuit will always output 0. Now we've got the circuits that can record both zeros and ones. The key to making this a useful piece of memory is to combine our two circuits into what's called the AND or latch. It has two inputs, a set input which sets the output to a 1, and a reset input which resets the output to a 0. If set and reset are both 0, the circuit just outputs whatever was last put in it. In other words, it remembers a single bit of information. Memory! This is called a latch because it latches onto a particular value into 0 because look at the same circuit. All of the logic circuits we've discussed so far are in one direction, always flowing forward, like our
I don't
output
get
in
it.
last episode. But we can also create circuits that
Before
reflect themselves. Let's
added.
try taking an ordinary OR gate.
Also
and
really
feeding the output into
confusing.
inputs and see what happens. First, let's set both inputs to 0. So 0 or 0 is 0, and so this circuit always outputs 0. If we were to flip input A to 1, 1 or 0 is 1. So now the output of the OR gate is 1. A fraction of a second later, that loops back around into input B. So the OR gate sees that both of its inputs are now 1. 1 or 1 is still 1. So there is no change in output. If we flip input A back to 0, the OR gate still outputs 1. So now we've got a circuit that records a 1 for us. Except we've got a teensy tiny problem. This change is permanent. No matter how hard we try, there's no way to get this circuit to flip back from a 1 to a 0. Now let's look at the same circuit with an AND gate instead. We'll start inputs A and B both at 1. 1 and 1 outputs 1 forever. But if we then flip input A to 0 because it's an AND gate, the output
But you
will go to
don't
0. So this circuit
remember,
records a 0, the
so
opposite
you
of our
need
other
to
circuit.
swap
Like
it
before, no matter
from-
what input we apply to input A afterwards, the circuit will always output 0. Now we've got the circuits that can record both zeros and ones.
Okay.
The key to making this a useful piece of memory is to combine our two circuits into what's called the AND or latch. It has two
Okay, hold on. So, wait. So, for example, wait, you're probably
it's a
gonna
setting
show it
which
to
sets
me.
the output.
Okay, yeah, this helps. 1 also. So this becomes 1. Now 1. And then 1 and 1 and 1 and 1 and 1 and 1. And then this becomes 1, right?
and reset
And then, okay. So this part is the memory part. And then this part is the reset part.
which resets the output to a 0. If set and reset are both 0, the circuit just outputs whatever was last put in it. In other words, it remembers a single bit of information. Memory! This is called a if set and reset are both 0, the circuit just outputs whatever was last put in it. In other words, set input which sets the output to a 1, and a reset input which resets the output to a 0. If set and reset are both 0, the circuit just outputs
Wait, am I dumb? Okay, so you have the memory and then now it stores, and then when you reset it, something you can
whatever was
change
last put in
it.
In other words, it remembers a single bit of information. Memory! This is called a latch because it latches onto a particular value and stays that way. The action of putting data into memory is called writing, whereas getting the data out is called reading. Okay, so we've got a way to store a single bit of information. Great! Unfortunately, having two different wires for input, set and reset, is a bit confusing. To make this a little easier to use, we really want a single wire to
This is the times I'm not seeing enough sleep, cause what?
input data that we can set to either 0 or 1 to store the value. Additionally, we're going to need a wire that enables memory either to be available for writing or locked down, which is called the write enable line. By adding a few extra logic gates, we can build this circuit, which is called a gate.
I'm confused. Okay, gate latch.
Since the gate can be opened or closed. Now this circuit is used, we really want a single wire
Say
to
again?
input data that we can set to either 0 or 1 to store the value. Additionally, we're going to need a wire that enables memory either to be available for writing or locked down, which is called the write enable line. By adding a few extra logic gates, we can build
Okay, so you put in it, then you can rewrite it? Is that what you're saying? Okay, so this part is the same as last time, the memory part. Okay, looks the same. Looks the same. Then the
this circuit, which
input
is called a gated latch.
gated latch.
Since the gate can be opened or closed. Now this circuit starts to get a little complicated.
Okay. So you have the data 1, and then 1 also goes into the AND gate and the NOT gate. Okay, so and available.
We don't want to have to deal with all the individual logic gates, so we can build this circuit, which is called
Why? Is that something I need to know in order to understand what is going on? Because I am confused. Huh. So you get data and you want to wait. Then you go this way. Go this way and then you save it. And this way, not. End. And then not it. Why do we need to I did an interactive exercise cause what?
gated latch, since the gate can be opened or closed. Now this circuit is starting to get a little complicated. We don't want to have to deal with all the individual logic gates. So as before, we're going to bump up a level of abstraction and put our whole gated latch circuit in a box that stores 1 bit. Let's test out our new component. Let's start everything at 0. If we toggle the data wire from 0 to 1 or 1 to 0, nothing happens. The output stays at 0. That's because the write enable wire is off, which prevents any change to the memory. So we need to open the gate by turning the write enable wire to 1. Now we can put a 1 on the data line to save the value to our latch. Notice how the output is now 1. Success! We can turn off the enable line and the output stays as 1. Once again, we can toggle the value on the data line all we want, but the output will stay the same. The value is saved in memory. Now let's turn the enable line on again and use our data line to set the latch to 0. Done. Enable line off, the output is 0, and it works. Now of course, computer memory that only stores 1 bit of information isn't very useful. Definitely not enough to run Frogger or anything really, but we're not limited to using only 1 latch. If we put 8 latches side by side, we can store 8 bits of information, like an 8-bit number. A group of latches operating like this is called a register, which holds a single number, and the number of bits in a register is called its width. Early computers had 8-bit registers, then 16, 32, and today, many computers have registers at 64 bits wide.
Work today is
No.
To write to our register, we first have to enable all of the latches. We can do this with a single wire that connects to all of their enable inputs, which we set to 1. We then send our data
I kinda wanna skip this one because why is it so complicated?
in using 8 data wires, and then set the enable back to 0, and the 8-bit value is now saved in memory. Putting latches side by side works okay for a smallish number of bits. A 64-bit register would need 64 wires running to the data pins, and 64 wires running to the outputs. Luckily, we only need 1 wire to enable all of the latches, but that's still 129 wires. For 256 bits, we end up with 513 wires. The solution is a matrix. In this matrix, we don't arrange our latches in a row, we put them in a grid. For 256 bits, we need a 16 by 16 grid of latches, with 16 rows and columns of wires. To activate any one latch, we must turn on the corresponding row and column wire. Let's zoom in and see how this works. We only want the latch at the intersection of the 2 active wires to be enabled. To the latches, that's still 129 wires. For 256 bits, we end up with 513 wires. The solution is a matrix. In this matrix, we don't arrange our latches in a row, we put them in a grid. For 256 bits, we need a 16 by 16 grid of latches, with 16 rows and columns of wires. To activate any one latch, we must turn on the corresponding row and column wire. Let's zoom in and see how this works. We only want the latch at the intersection of the 2 active wires to be enabled, but all of the other latches should stay disabled. For this, we can use our trusty AND gate. The AND gate will output a 1 only if the row and the column wires are both 1. So we can use this signal to uniquely select a single latch. This row and column setup connects all of our latches with a single shared write enable wire. In order for a latch to become write enabled, the row wire, the column wire, and the write enable wire must all be 1. That should only ever be true for one single latch at any given time. This means we can use a single shared wire for data, because only one latch will ever be write enabled. Only one will ever save the data. The rest of the latches will simply ignore values on data wire because they are not write enabled. We can use the same trick with a read enable wire to read the data later to get the data out of one specific latch. This means in total for